I learned the price of secrets on a Tuesday afternoon when my mother-in-law's perfectly manicured hand slid a prenup across the marble countertop and said, "Sign it. Unless you want to embarrass yourself. My name is Tiara." And for 18 months, I'd been married to a lie. The thing about marrying into old money is that nobody tells you the rules until you've already broken them. They don't hand you a manual that says, "Your worth will be measured in bloodlines. Your contributions won't count." And the woman who raised your husband will spend every waking moment reminding you that you don't belong. I met Julian Ashworth at a charity gala in Manhattan. I was there covering the event for the lifestyle magazine, where I worked as a junior editor. He was there because his family's name was literally engraved on the building. He spilled champagne on my dress, apologized profusely, offered to pay for the cleaning. I laughed and told him it was a $20 dress from a thrift store. He looked at me like I'd just solved a puzzle he'd been working on his entire life. "You're serious," he'd said. "Dead serious. I'm excellent at thrift shopping. I don't think I've ever met anyone who shops at thrift stores." "Then you're missing out on the best treasure hunts in New York." 6 months later, he proposed, with a ring that cost more than my annual salary. In a restaurant where the waiters wore white gloves and the menu had no prices, I should have seen the warning signs. But I was 27, in love, and naive enough to believe that love conquered all, including the disapproval radiating from his mother, Vivienne Ashworth, like ice crystals forming on glass. The morning everything changed started ordinary enough. I woke up in our penthouse apartment in Tribeca, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River, furniture that cost more than my parents' house in Ohio, a kitchen with appliances I still didn't know how to use. Julian was already gone. Early meeting with the family's investment firm. He'd left a note on the counter. "Love you. Mom wants to have lunch. Please go. For me. For me." Those 2 words carried the weight of 18 months of peacekeeping. I'd been trying with Vivienne. God, I'd been trying. Learning which fork to use at formal dinners. Taking etiquette classes she'd suggested. Letting her redecorate our apartment because my taste was quaint. Attending her charity events. Smiling through her introductions. "This is Julian's wife." She worked in magazines before the wedding. Worked. Past tense. As if marrying her son had ended my career instead of putting it on hold, while I figured out how to be both myself and Mrs. Julian Ashworth. I'd met Vivienne for lunch at her usual place, Le Bernardin, where she had a standing reservation and the staff greeted her by name. She was already seated when I arrived. 72, but looked 55. Blonde hair in a perfect chignon, Chanel suit, pearls that probably cost more than a car. The kind of woman who made you conscious of every thread in your outfit, every word in your vocabulary, every breath you took. "You're late," she said, not looking up from her phone. I was 3 minutes early. "Traffic," I said, sitting down across from her. "Tiara." She set down her phone with the precision of someone placing a chess piece. "We need to have a conversation, woman to woman." My stomach tightened. I knew that tone. I'd heard it before, when she'd suggested I quit my job, when she'd recommended we postpone having children, when she'd advised me that Julian's trust fund required certain considerations. "Okay," I said carefully. She opened her Hermes bag, pulled out a thick manila envelope, slid it across the white tablecloth like a weapon. "What is this?" "A post-nuptial agreement. My lawyers drafted it last week." I stared at the envelope. "A post-nup?" "We're already married." "Exactly. Which is why we need to correct certain oversights from the original arrangement." She sipped her water, perfectly calm. "When you married Julian, my late husband's estate was still in probate. Certain assets weren't properly allocated. Now that everything is settled, We need to ensure the family's wealth remains in the family. I don't understand. Julian and I don't have separate finances. You have access to Julian's accounts. That's different from ownership. Her smile was surgical. This agreement clarifies that in the event of a divorce, you leave with exactly what you brought into the marriage, which, as I recall, was a studio apartment in Brooklyn and approximately $14,000 in savings. The words landed like slaps, clinical, precise, designed to wound. Why would we get divorced? I asked, my voice steady, despite the hammering in my chest. Statistically, 50% of marriages end in divorce, 67% when there's a significant wealth disparity. She recited the numbers like a weather report. I'm simply being pragmatic. Sign the agreement, and we can order lunch. Refuse, and, well, Julian will be disappointed. He's been working so hard to keep everyone happy. There it was, the implicit threat. Sign, or I'll make your husband choose between us. And we both knew who he'd choose. Not because he didn't love me, but because he'd spent 43 years learning that disappointing Vivienne Ashworth had consequences. I need to read it first, I said. Of course. She gestured to the waiter. We'll order while you review. I recommend the halibut. I opened the envelope with shaking hands. 27 pages of legal language. But the summary was clear. I would have no claim to any Ashworth assets, no claim to the apartment, the vacation homes, the investment accounts, the trust funds. If Julian and I divorced, I'd leave with nothing but my personal belongings and whatever money I'd earned independently. Which, since I'd stopped working to be the wife Vivienne wanted, was exactly nothing. This isn't fair, I said quietly. Fair is a concept for children, darling. This is business. The Ashworth family has built wealth over 4 generations. I won't watch it dissolve because my son fell in love with someone who can't tell the difference between Christelle and Andre. The contempt in her voice was so casual, so practiced, that I almost missed it. Almost. But I heard it. The unspoken message beneath every word. You don't belong here. You never did. And I'm going to make sure you remember that. I looked at Vivienne across the table. This woman who'd raised the man I loved. This woman who saw me as a threat instead of a daughter. This woman who'd just reduced our entire relationship to a transaction. And something in me clicked. Not anger yet. Just clarity. I'd spent 18 months trying to be enough for her. Enough polish, enough pedigree, enough performance. I'd twisted myself into smaller and smaller shapes, trying to fit into her world. But sitting there, holding a legal document designed to erase me, I realized something. I'd forgotten to ask the most important question. What if her world wasn't worth fitting into? I need time to think about this, I said, sliding the envelope back across the table. Vivienne's eyes hardened. You have until Friday. Sign it, or I'll have my lawyers file the paperwork to freeze Julian's access to certain family accounts. Accounts he needs for the business, accounts that fund your lifestyle. You'd sabotage your own son? I'd protect my family's legacy. There's a difference. She leaned forward slightly. You seem like a nice girl, Tiara, but nice doesn't build empires, and it certainly doesn't preserve them. Sign the paper, walk away with your dignity, or refuse, and learn exactly how far I'm willing to go. The waiter arrived with menus. Vivienne ordered the halibut. I ordered nothing. I left the restaurant 20 minutes later, envelope in my bag. Vivienne's words echoing in my head. You'll leave with nothing. I rode the subway back to Tribeca, our penthouse apartment with its river views and museum-quality furniture. Julian's family legacy, wrapped in marble and glass, and the weight of 4 generations of expectations. I stood in our living room, looking at the life I'd been living, the life that had never quite felt like mine. And I asked myself a question I'd been avoiding for 18 months. What did I actually bring into this marriage? What was mine underneath all the Ashworth money and influence and expectations? The answer should have been nothing. That's what Vivienne wanted me to believe. That without her son's name and wealth, I was nothing. But standing there, alone in that expensive apartment, I remembered something. A conversation with Julian's father before he died. A private moment in his study. A sealed envelope he'd given me with strict instructions. "Keep this safe," he'd said, "and only open it if Vivienne ever tries to take what's yours." I'd forgotten about that envelope, tucked it away in a place Vivienne would never think to look. But suddenly I needed to find it. Because if I'd learned anything in 18 months of trying to survive in Vivienne Ashworth's world, it was this: secrets had power. And maybe, just maybe, I had more power than anyone realized. I found the envelope exactly where I'd hidden it 18 months ago, behind a loose panel in my closet. The closet Vivienne had never bothered to redesign because staff quarters don't require aesthetic attention. She thought this was the maid's room before we converted it. She was wrong, but I'd never corrected her. The envelope was thick, cream-colored paper. Julian's father's initials, embossed in navy blue. Charles Ashworth had died 6 months before Julian and I got married. Heart attack at 71, sudden, unexpected. The kind of loss that hollows out a family. Julian rarely talked about him. When he did, his voice carried a weight I'd learned not to press on. Father-son relationships in families like the Ashworths weren't warm. They were transactional, preparation for legacy, training for duty. But Charles had been kind to me. In the brief time I'd known him, I remembered that day in his study, 3 weeks before he died. He'd asked to speak with me privately. Vivienne had been irritated. She hated when Charles bypassed her authority. "Tiara," he'd said, closing the door. His study smelled like old books and expensive scotch. "I need to tell you something about my wife." I'd sat down, nervous, wondering if this was the conversation where he'd warn me off. Tell me I wasn't good enough for his son. Instead, he'd said, "Vivienne loves Julian, but she loves control more. And she's never forgiven me for choosing love over strategy in my own marriage. I don't understand. My first wife, Julian's mother." He'd poured himself a drink, hands steady, but eyes sad. "She came from old money, like us. That's who my parents wanted me to marry. That's who Vivienne was supposed to be replaced by after she left." I'd blinked. Wait. Vivienne isn't Julian's biological mother. Charles had looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Julian doesn't know. He was 2 when his mother left. Vivienne married me 6 months later, raised him as her own, legally adopted him, did everything right. But she's never stopped feeling like she had to prove herself. To my family, to society, to herself. Why are you telling me this?" "Because you remind me of why I married Vivienne. She was ambitious, brilliant. She came from nothing and built herself into something formidable. I thought I was rescuing her from a life of struggle. Instead, I turned her into exactly what she'd been running from. Someone who measured worth in bloodlines and bank accounts." He'd opened a drawer, pulled out the envelope. "Vivienne will test you. She's already started. And eventually, she'll push far enough that you'll have to decide stay and lose yourself, or leave and lose everything else." He'd handed me the envelope. "When that moment comes, open this. Not before. The information inside will either free you or destroy this family, maybe both. Charles, promise me, Tiara. Only open it when you have no other choice." I'd promised, hidden the envelope, and then watched Charles die 3 weeks later. At the funeral, Vivienne had cried elegantly. Julian had been stoic. And I'd wondered if Charles had known something was coming. If he'd felt his time running out. Now, holding that envelope in my hands, I understood. He'd known exactly what Vivienne would do. He'd prepared for it. I didn't open the envelope right away. Instead, I called Julian. "Hey, babe," he answered on the second ring, background noise of office chatter. "How was lunch with Mom? We need to talk." In person. His tone shifted immediately. "What happened?" "Just come home, please." "Tiara, I have meetings until—" "Julian." My voice cracked slightly. Not performance. Real emotion. "I need you to come home. Now." 20 minutes later, he walked through the door. Tie loosened. Concern etched across his face. Julian was handsome in that effortless way wealthy men often are. Good genes, better grooming, confidence born from never having to worry about money. "What's wrong?" he asked. I handed him the post-nup, watched his face as he read. The color drained slowly, like watching water leak from a glass. When he looked up, his expression was complicated. Guilt, shame, something that might have been resignation. "You knew," I said. Not a question. "She mentioned she was having lawyers review some paperwork. I didn't know it was this." "Don't lie to me." "Not now." Julian set down the papers, ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times when he was stressed. "She called me last week, said the estate settlement revealed some complications, that we needed to protect family assets. I told her to handle it with her lawyers. You told her to handle it." "I thought it was standard stuff. Tax planning, trust restructuring. I didn't know she was going to—" He gestured at the document. "This. She gave me until Friday to sign. Said if I don't, she'll freeze your accounts, sabotage your access to family money. She can't do that." "Can't she?" I looked at him. This man I loved. This man who'd been raised to prioritize family loyalty above everything else. "Julian, be honest with me. If I refuse to sign this, and she follows through on her threat, what will you do?" The silence stretched. And in that silence, I heard everything I needed to know. "I'd fight her," he said finally. But his voice lacked conviction. "You'd try to keep us both happy. You'd negotiate, compromise. Find some middle ground where I sign a slightly less insulting version of this document, and your mother gets to keep her control. That's not fair. None of this is fair." My voice rose. "Your mother just told me I'm worth nothing. That 18 months of marriage entitles me to nothing. That if you get tired of disappointing her and decide to leave me, I walk away with $14,000 and whatever fits in a suitcase. I'm not going to leave you. But she thinks you might. Or she wants you to. Or she's planning for it. Because in her world, I'm not a wife. I'm a liability." Julian reached for me. I stepped back. "Don't," I said. "Don't touch me right now. Because I need you to understand something. I gave up my career for this marriage. Not because you asked me to, you never did, but because your mother made it clear that working wives were inappropriate for Ashworth men. I gave up my apartment, my independence, my entire life. And I did it because I loved you. Because I thought we were building something together. We are we? Or am I just here until your mother decides I've served my purpose? Tiara, you know that's not—" "What I know," I interrupted, my voice steady now, cold with clarity, "is that your mother sees me as a threat. And you see me as a problem to be managed. And neither of you has ever seen me as an equal." The words hung between us, true and terrible. Julian's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, winced. "It's her," he said. "Of course it is. She's probably calling to make sure I'm sufficiently terrified, checking if her intimidation worked. I'll tell her this isn't okay. You'll do what you always do. You'll say the right things to both of us. Promise me you're on my side while reassuring her that family comes first. And somehow, I'll end up being the unreasonable one for not understanding that this is just how things are done." That's not. He stopped. Because we both knew it was exactly what would happen. His phone buzzed again, insistent. Answer it, I said. She'll just keep calling. Julian hesitated, then swiped to answer. Put it on speaker. Julian. Vivienne's voice filled the room. Crisp, controlled. I assume Tiara told you about our lunch. Mom, this is necessary. I know you're upset, but this is about protecting what your father built, what 4 generations of Ashworths have built. Surely you understand that. Demanding Tiara sign away any claim to our life together isn't protection. It's punishment. It's prudence. Your wife is lovely, darling. But she came from nothing. No offense, Tiara. I'm sure you're listening. I was, standing right there, invisible in my own home. People from her background don't understand generational wealth. They see money as something to spend, not something to preserve. This agreement ensures that if things don't work out, and statistically, they often don't, our assets remain protected. Things are working out, Julian said. But even I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Are they? You've been married 18 months. You barely see each other. You work 60-hour weeks. She spends her days doing God knows what in that apartment. No children on the horizon, no social contribution. What exactly is she contributing to this family? I felt each word like a physical blow, systematic, designed to dismantle. She's my wife, Julian said. That should be enough. Love is wonderful, darling, but it's not a business plan, and this family is a business. Vivienne's voice softened, became almost gentle. I'm not trying to hurt anyone. I'm trying to protect you, protect what we've built. If Tiara really loves you, she'll understand that. She'll sign the agreement and we'll move forward. Unless what? I spoke for the first time. Unless you're planning to divorce my son and take half of everything. In which case, I suppose I understand your resistance. The accusation was barely veiled. Sign the paper and prove you're not a gold digger. Or refuse and confirm her suspicions. A perfect trap. I need to think about this, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. I need legal advice, time to process. You have until Friday, Vivienne repeated. Julian, I'll expect you for dinner Thursday. We need to discuss the Henderson acquisition. Alone. She hung up. Julian and I stood in our living room, the afternoon light cutting across expensive furniture and the widening space between us. What are you going to do? He asked finally. I thought about the envelope hidden in my closet. Charles's final message. The information that would either free me or destroy this family. I'm going to find out exactly what I'm worth, I said. And it's not nothing. I walked to the closet. Julian followed. Watched as I retrieved the envelope. What is that? Something your father gave me before he died. He told me to open it only if your mother ever tried to take what was mine. My father gave you... Tiara, what did he tell you? I looked at Julian. This man I loved. This man whose family had built a golden cage and called it legacy. He told me the truth about your mother. About who she really is. And about what she's really afraid of. I broke the seal. Inside were documents, pages and pages of them, legal papers, financial records, and a letter in Charles Ashworth's distinctive handwriting. I read the first line aloud. If you're reading this, my wife has revealed her true nature, and it's time you knew. Vivienne Ashworth has no legal claim to the Ashworth fortune. But you do. Julian's face went white. What? I kept reading, and with every word I understood. Charles hadn't just given me information. He'd given me a nuclear option, and Vivienne Ashworth had just made sure I was desperate enough to use it. The letter was dated 3 weeks before Charles Ashworth died. Julian sat down heavily on the bed as I read it aloud. Each word carefully chosen, each revelation deliberately timed. Dear Tiara, if you're reading this, it means Vivienne has done exactly what I feared. She's tried to erase you from our family because she's terrified you'll discover what I'm about to tell you. 24 years ago, I made a decision that shaped everything that followed. My first wife, Catherine, Julian's biological mother, left us when Julian was 2 years old. She was brilliant, unstable, and ultimately unwilling to be trapped in the life my family demanded. She signed away all parental rights, disappeared to Europe, died in a car accident. 5 years later, I was left with a toddler, a business to run, and a family reputation to maintain. Single fathers from old money families don't raise children alone. It's unseemly, suggests instability. My parents were already pressuring me to remarry someone appropriate. Vivienne worked in our accounting department. She was 28, ambitious, brilliant with numbers, and desperate to escape a life of poverty. We made a deal. She would marry me, raise Julian as her own, become Mrs. Charles Ashworth in every public way. In return, I would provide her with the life she'd always wanted. What I didn't know was that Vivienne had been planning for exactly this opportunity. She didn't just want comfort, she wanted control. Over the years, she systematically positioned herself as the guardian of Ashworth family values. She learned everything about managing wealth, preserving legacy, controlling narrative. She became more Ashworth than the Ashworths. And she made sure everyone, including Julian, believed she had always belonged. But here's what she never knew. I never gave her legal claim to the family trust. The original Ashworth Trust, established by my grandfather in 1924, has specific bloodline requirements. Only direct descendants can be primary beneficiaries. Spouses have access during marriage, but no permanent claim. When I die, control passes to Julian. When Julian dies, it passes to his children. Or, in very specific circumstances outlined in the trust documents, to his spouse, if that spouse can prove direct contribution to family wealth through documented investment, business acumen, or preservation of assets. Vivienne has been living off Ashworth money for 24 years, but she's never legally owned any of it. She's been a very well-compensated employee. Nothing more. Now, here's why this matters to you. 2 years ago, I amended the trust. I added a provision that my lawyers assured me was airtight. Any spouse of Julian's who is subjected to coercive post-nuptial agreements, threats to financial security, or systematic attempts at disinheritance will automatically trigger a trust investigation. And if that investigation reveals financial manipulation by any family member, that family member loses all access to trust assets. I did this because I knew Vivienne would see Julian's marriage as a threat. I knew she'd try to protect her wealth by eliminating anyone she perceived as competition. And I knew she'd eventually push too far. The documents enclosed will show you everything. 1. The original trust documents with bloodline requirements. 2. My amendment protecting future spouses. 3. Financial records showing Vivienne's actual legal relationship to Ashworth assets, spousal access, not ownership. 4. A sealed affidavit I filed with the family attorneys detailing my concerns about Vivienne's future behavior. 5. Instructions for triggering the trust investigation. Tiara, I chose you for my son because you reminded me of who Vivienne used to be, before desperation turned into obsession. You're smart, genuine, and you haven't let wealth corrupt your values, yet. But I also chose to protect you, because I failed to protect Catherine. I let my family's expectations destroy her. I won't let that happen again. Use this information wisely. It's a weapon, and weapons destroy. But sometimes destruction is necessary for rebuilding. With respect and hope, Charles Ashworth. The silence after I finished reading was absolute. Julian's face had gone through several colors. Pale, flushed, pale again. He looked like someone had pulled the foundation out from under his entire life. Which, I supposed, is exactly what had happened. My mother isn't... He couldn't finish the sentence. Your biological mother, number. But she raised you, loved you. That part is real. And my actual mother just... left? According to this, yes. And my father knew Vivienne would... He gestured helplessly at the papers. He knew she'd do this? He suspected. So he prepared. Julian stood up, paced to the window, looked out at Manhattan stretching below us, his kingdom, his inheritance, his prison. Why didn't he tell me? His voice cracked. Why did he let me grow up thinking, believing? Because you were 2 years old when Catherine left. Because Vivienne was the only mother you knew. Because telling you would have shattered the family stability he was trying to build. I moved closer to him. Your father wasn't perfect, Julian. But he tried to protect you. And when he realized Vivienne's protection had become control, he tried to protect your future too, by making my wife a weapon against my mother. The words stung, because they were accurate. By giving me information, I corrected quietly. What I do with it is my choice. Julian turned to face me. What are you going to do? I looked at the documents spread across our bed. Legal ammunition, family secrets. The truth about power and legacy and who really controlled what. I don't know yet, I admitted. But I need to understand what I'm holding. Which means I need to talk to your father's lawyers. Harrison Mitchell had been the Ashworth family attorney for 37 years. His office was in Midtown. Wood-panelled walls, Persian rugs, the smell of old money and older secrets. He'd agreed to see me within an hour of my call, which told me everything I needed to know. He'd been expecting this. Mrs. Ashworth, he greeted me. Not Tiara, not Julian's wife. Mrs. Ashworth. A title I'd never felt I'd earned. Please sit. I sat, placed Charles's envelope on his desk. Harrison looked at it. Then at me, his expression carefully neutral. So she finally did it, he said. The post-nup? Yes. Yesterday. Charles predicted 18 months. He was only off by a few weeks. Harrison opened a file on his desk. He came to me 2 years ago, said he'd made a mistake marrying Vivienne, not because he didn't care for her, he did, but because he'd underestimated how thoroughly poverty had traumatized her, how desperately she'd cling to security once she had it. He told me she came from nothing, worse than nothing. Abusive father, alcoholic mother. She put herself through community college working 3 jobs, got an accounting degree, clawed her way into our firm's back office. She was brilliant, hungry, and absolutely terrified of ever being poor again. Harrison pulled out a document, slid it across to me. This is the Ashworth Family Trust, established 1924, amended 7 times, most recently by Charles in 2022. Do you understand what you're looking at? I scanned the legal language. My magazine background had taught me to parse complex information quickly, find the story beneath the jargon. It's a bloodline trust. Only direct descendants of the original founder can be primary beneficiaries. Correct. Spouses have access during marriage, but they don't own. They can't control, and they certainly can't dictate terms to primary beneficiaries. Which means Vivienne has been living on borrowed power for 24 years. Exactly. And she knows it. Which is why she's so obsessed with control. Every decision she makes, every social connection she cultivates, every business move she advocates is about securing her position. Because she knows the truth. If Julian ever turns against her, she has nothing. Except Julian would never turn against her. He's spent his entire life trying to make her proud. Which is why she's gotten away with it for so long. Harrison leaned back in his chair, But then you came along. Young, genuine, not particularly interested in the Ashworth fortune. You made Julian happy in a way Vivienne couldn't control, and that terrified her. So she's trying to eliminate me before I become a permanent threat. She's trying to ensure that if she can't control you, at least she can erase you. He tapped the document. But Charles's amendment changes everything, if you choose to trigger it. Walk me through what that means. Harrison pulled out another file. This one thicker. Charles's amendment states that any attempt to coerce a spouse of a direct beneficiary into signing away their legal rights will trigger an automatic investigation into family financial management. That investigation will examine all trust transactions for the past 25 years. Every expense, every investment, every decision made by non-bloodline family members with access to trust assets. You're saying we'd be investigating Vivienne. We'd be investigating everyone. But yes, Vivienne would be the primary focus. And here's what Charles discovered in his own quiet investigation before he died. Harrison opened the file, showed me pages of financial records. Vivienne has been systematically funneling trust money into personal accounts disguised as business expenses. Charity donations that never reach charities. Consulting fees paid to shell companies she controls. Over the past 15 years, she's diverted approximately $18 million. I stared at the numbers. 18 million. From a family trust worth hundreds of millions, it might seem small. But it was theft. Systematic, deliberate, hidden. Charles knew about this. He discovered it 6 months before he died. He was planning to confront her. Then he had the heart attack. Harrison's expression darkened. The autopsy showed his medication had been inconsistent, wrong dosages, as if someone had been tampering with it. The implication hung in the air, ugly, unthinkable. You think Vivienne? I think Charles thought she might. That's why he wrote the letter. Filed the affidavit, protected you. Harrison met my eyes. Mrs. Ashworth, if you trigger this investigation, it will destroy Vivienne. It will also devastate Julian. And it will expose your family to scrutiny that could damage the Ashworth reputation permanently. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the post-nup sitting on my counter. Vivienne's ultimatum, her casual cruelty, her assumption that I was worthless without Ashworth money. I thought about Julian, caught between a mother who'd raised him and a truth that would shatter everything he believed. I thought about Charles, a man who'd tried to protect everyone and ended up protecting no one. Until the very end, when he'd given me a choice. What happens if I don't trigger it? I asked. If I just sign the post-nup and walk away? Then Vivienne wins. She keeps her stolen millions. She maintains control over Julian. And the next woman who marries into this family will face the exact same test. And the one after that. Because this isn't about you, Mrs. Ashworth. It's about power. And Vivienne will protect her power at any cost. Even murder? I can't prove anything about Charles's death. Neither could the investigators. But I know what Charles believed. And I know why he gave you that envelope. Harrison closed the files, looked at me with something that might have been respect. You have until Friday to decide. Sign the post-nup, preserve the peace, and accept that you'll always be conditional in this family, or trigger the investigation, expose the truth, and watch everything burn. There's no middle ground here, no compromise. Vivienne made sure of that. I stood up, gathered the documents. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. I need to talk to Julian, I said. Of course. But Mrs. Ashworth? Harrison stopped me at the door. Whatever you decide, make sure it's your decision. Not his, not Vivienne's, not even Charles's. Yours. Because you're the only one who has to live with the consequences. I found Julian, where I knew he'd be, his father's study, The one room in our apartment he'd barely touched since Charles died. Still smelled like scotch and old books. He was sitting in Charles's chair, holding a photo of his father, looking lost. "Did you know?" I asked from the doorway. "About the money she stole?" Number. "About my mother, Catherine, leaving?" Number. "About any of this?" He looked at me, eyes red. "I thought I knew my family. Turns out I don't know anything. You know Vivienne loved you." That part was real. Was it? Or was I just an investment? Her ticket to security? Both can be true, Julian. People are complicated. He laughed, bitter. That's generous, considering she's trying to erase you from our lives. I sat down across from him. We looked at each other across the desk, where his father had worked, where Charles had made the decisions that led to this moment. "We have a choice," I said. "I trigger the investigation. We expose Vivienne. We probably destroy her. And in the process, we tear apart everything you've ever believed about your family. Or I sign the post-nup. We let her keep her secrets. We preserve the peace. And we try to build a marriage inside a system designed to keep me powerless. That's not a choice. That's surrender. Maybe. Or maybe it's strategy. Pick our battles. Wait for better ground." Julian was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was different. Older. Harder. "I spent my whole life trying to make her proud. Every decision, every achievement, every sacrifice. I did it for her approval. And now I find out she's been stealing from us, lying to us, possibly even." He couldn't say it. "We don't know what happened to your father, but we suspect. And suspicion is almost worse than knowing. Because now I'll always wonder, every memory, every moment, was it real or was it calculated?" "Julian, I want to know the truth," he said suddenly, fiercely. "Whatever it is, whatever it costs. I want to know who Vivienne really is, and I want her to know that she doesn't control me anymore. Are you sure? Because once we do this, we can't take it back." He looked at the photo of his father, then at me. "Dad gave you that envelope because he knew I'd need you to be stronger than me, to make the decision I couldn't make, to do what was right even when it hurt." He stood up, came around the desk, took my hands. "So I'm telling you, do it. Trigger the investigation. Let the truth come out. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." I looked at my husband, this man who'd been raised in luxury and lies, who'd just learned his entire life was built on secrets, who was choosing truth over comfort, choosing me over his mother. For the first time since Vivienne had slid that post-nup across the table, I felt something shift. Not love, that had always been there, but partnership, real partnership. Two people facing impossible choices and choosing each other. "Okay," I said, "but we do this my way. Strategic, careful, not as revenge, as justice." "How?" I pulled out my phone, texted Harrison Mitchell 3 words, "Start the investigation." Then I looked at Julian. "Now we wait for your mother to realize she just made the worst mistake of her life." "What mistake?" "She assumed I had nothing. She assumed wrong." Julian's phone buzzed. A text from Vivienne. "Dinner Thursday, 7 p.m. Don't be late. We have important matters to discuss." I smiled. Cold, calculated, strategic. "Tell her you're bringing me," I said. Thursday arrived with the weight of inevitability. Harrison Mitchell had moved quickly. Within 48 hours, he'd assembled a team of forensic accountants, filed the formal investigation request with the trust administrators, and frozen all discretionary disbursements pending review. By law, Vivienne had to be notified. She received the documents Wednesday afternoon. She didn't call, didn't text, didn't acknowledge them at all, which told me everything. She was planning her counterattack. Julian and I arrived at the Ashworth estate at exactly 7 p.m. The house in Greenwich, Connecticut, 22 rooms on 4 acres, purchased by Charles's grandfather in 1931. Every inch designed to communicate permanence, legacy, inherited superiority. I'd been here dozens of times, always as a guest, always performing the role of appropriate daughter-in-law, always aware I was being evaluated. Tonight felt different. Tonight, I wasn't performing. Vivienne answered the door herself, no staff. Deliberate. This was personal. She looked immaculate as always. Ivory silk blouse, tailored black pants, the family pearls. But something in her eyes was different. Harder. More focused. Like a predator who'd finally located its prey. Julian. Tiara. She said my name like it tasted bitter. Come in. The dining room was set for 3. Fine china, crystal, fresh flowers. The stage for her performance. We sat. Vivienne at the head of the table. Julian and I across from each other. A triangle of tension. I assume, Vivienne began, pouring wine she knew I wouldn't drink. You received my dinner invitation before you decided to declare war on your family. We filed for a routine trust investigation, Julian said carefully. Standard procedure when... Don't insult my intelligence. Her voice was ice. There's nothing routine about what you did. You froze my accounts, my access to funds I've managed for 24 years. You've subjected me to forensic audits. You've painted me as a thief in my own home. Are you? I asked quietly. A thief? Vivienne's eyes snapped to mine. You have a lot of nerve, coming into this family with nothing, taking advantage of my son's kindness, and now trying to destroy everything I've built. You didn't build anything, I said. My voice calm, measured. You married it. There's a difference. I raised Julian. I managed this estate. I preserved the Ashworth reputation through scandals and recessions and Charles's incompetence. I earned every dollar I have access to. Earned, not owned, not controlled, accessed. I leaned forward slightly. That's what this is really about, isn't it? You've spent 24 years pretending you had power, but you were always just borrowing it. And you knew if Julian ever found out the truth, your whole carefully constructed life would collapse. The truth, Vivienne repeated slowly. You want to talk about truth? Let's talk about truth. She stood up, walked to a cabinet, pulled out a file folder, dropped it on the table in front of me. Your truth, Tiara, the one you've been hiding. I opened the folder, felt my stomach drop. Inside were documents, financial records, employment history, and photographs. Of me, from before I met Julian. Did you think I wouldn't investigate you? Vivienne asked. The moment Julian brought you home, I had private investigators digging into every corner of your life. And you know what they found? She pulled out a photograph. Me, younger, standing in front of a rundown apartment building. You grew up in Section 8 housing in Cleveland. Your father was unemployed most of your childhood. Your mother cleaned houses to pay rent. You received free lunch at school, food stamps, every government assistance program available. You were poor, Tiara, desperately poor. Julian looked at the photo, then at me. You told me you grew up middle class, that your dad worked construction. He did, I said quietly, when he could find work, which wasn't often. You lied. I simplified. There's a difference. Is there? Vivienne's voice was triumphant. Because it seems to me you've been running a very long con. Poor girl meets rich man, hides her background, marries into money, refuses the post-nup, and suddenly files for an investigation that could net her millions if she divorces my son. That's not what's happening, isn't it? You're no different than me, darling. Except I had the decency to be honest about what I was. You're pretending to be something you're not. At least I owned my ambition. The accusation landed. Precise. Designed to make Julian doubt me. Doubt us. I looked at my husband. Saw the confusion in his eyes. The question, had I been lying this whole time? And I realized this was Vivienne's real weapon. Not money, not power, doubt. She'd turned Julian against me by making him question everything he thought he knew. Unless I fought back with something stronger than defense. Truth. You're right, I said. Vivienne blinked. What? You're right. I grew up poor. Profoundly poor. The kind of poor where you wear the same 3 outfits all year and tell people it's a fashion choice. Where you volunteer to stay after school for extra credit. Because school has heat, and your apartment doesn't. Where you get good at making excuses for why you can't go to friends' houses because you don't want them to see where you live. I pulled the photograph toward me. Looked at that younger version of myself. 17. Wearing a thrift store coat 3 sizes too big. Standing in front of the building where we'd lived for 6 years. My father wasn't unemployed by choice. He had a back injury from construction work. No insurance. Couldn't afford surgery. Ended up on disability that barely covered rent. My mother worked herself to exhaustion, cleaning other people's houses, and I swore I would never be that vulnerable again. So you targeted my son. I worked 3 jobs through college, I continued, ignoring her. I graduated summa cum laude. I got a job at a magazine through pure competence. I built a career, a life, an identity that wasn't defined by poverty. And yes, when I met Julian, I didn't lead with, "Hi, I'm from Section 8 housing," because I wanted him to see me. Not my history, not my bank account, me. That's called deception, Vivienne said coldly. That's called survival. I stood up. But here's the difference between us, Vivienne. I didn't marry Julian for his money. I married him despite it. Because his wealth terrified me. It meant I'd always be dependent. Always be conditional. Always be one bad decision away from being exactly what you're trying to prove I am. A gold digger who doesn't belong. Then why stay? Julian asked. His voice rough. If the money terrified you, why not refuse all of it? Why let me pay for everything? Because you insisted, I said simply. Because every time I tried to contribute, you told me it wasn't necessary. That your money was our money. That we were partners. But we weren't partners, were we? We were playing roles. You got to be the provider. I got to be the grateful wife. And neither of us questioned what that dynamic cost. I turned back to Vivienne. You want to know why I triggered the investigation? Not for money, not for revenge. For agency. Because I'm tired of being powerless in my own marriage. Tired of performing gratitude for a life I never asked for. Tired of watching you manipulate Julian through guilt while stealing from the family you claim to protect. I never stole. $18 million, I said. Documented. Transferred. Hidden. Harrison Mitchell has the records. The forensic accountants have the trail. You've been systematically embezzling from the Ashworth Trust for 15 years. And when Charles discovered it, he died. Conveniently, suddenly, from medication that someone tampered with. The room went silent. Absolute, terrible. Vivienne's face had gone white. You're accusing me of murder. I'm stating facts. Charles suspected you. He documented his concerns. He died under suspicious circumstances. And you've spent every moment since trying to consolidate control before anyone could question you. Julian. Vivienne turned to her son, her voice breaking. You can't possibly believe this. I raised you. I loved you. Everything I've done has been to protect this family. Julian looked at his mother. This woman who'd been his entire world for 43 years. This woman who'd shaped every value he held. This woman who might have killed his father. Did you tamper with Dad's medication? He asked quietly. Of course not. The doctors said it was a heart attack, natural causes. Julian, you know me. You know I would never. I thought I knew you, Julian interrupted, his voice hollow. I thought I knew a lot of things. Turns out, I don't know anything. He pulled out his phone, showed her the screen. These are the financial records Harrison sent me. Charity donations you claimed, except the charities never received the money. Business consultants you hired, except the companies don't exist. Personal expenses charged to trust accounts. $18 million, Mum. Over 15 years. Every dollar documented, every transaction traceable. I managed those funds. You stole them. Julian's voice was getting louder. Years of suppressed doubt finally breaking through. You've been stealing from our family trust. From me. And when Dad discovered it, he conveniently died. And then you tried to force my wife, the only person who saw through you, to sign away her rights so she couldn't expose you. That's not... Julian, please. Stop. He stood up. Just stop. Stop lying. Stop manipulating. Stop pretending you did any of this for me. You did it for yourself. Because you were so terrified of being poor again that you turned into exactly what you feared. Someone who'd do anything, hurt anyone, destroy everything, to hold on to money that was never yours. Vivienne's composure cracked. Tears streamed down her face, real ones. Because she was finally facing the one thing she'd spent 24 years avoiding. The truth. I did it for us, she whispered. For our security. For our family. We were never your family, Julian said. The words brutal, final. We were your insurance policy, and the moment you thought you might lose us, you showed us exactly who you really are. He turned to me. Can I see the letter? The one Dad wrote? I handed it to him, watched him read his father's final words, saw him process the truth about his biological mother, about Vivienne, about the choice Charles had made to protect me and, by extension, Julian himself. When he finished, he carefully folded the letter. Looked at Vivienne. You're going to return every dollar you took, he said. All 18 million, plus interest. You're going to sign a full confession. And you're going to resign from any position you hold in Ashworth family business. And if I refuse? Vivienne asked, some of her old steel returning. Then we prosecute. Publicly. The Ashworth name will be destroyed. But at least it'll be destroyed by the truth instead of your lies. Vivienne looked between us, calculating, trying to find an angle, a way to salvage something from the wreckage. Julian, she tried one more time, I'm your mother. Doesn't that count for something? You raised me, he said quietly. You fed me and clothed me and sent me to the best schools. But a mother doesn't steal. A mother doesn't manipulate. A mother doesn't murder. I didn't murder anyone. Maybe not. But you let Dad die believing you might. And that's almost worse. Julian walked to the door, stopped, turned back. You wanted to know what Tiara brought into this marriage? I'll tell you. She brought integrity. She brought the courage to tell me the truth when it would have been easier to stay silent. She brought the strength to walk away from comfort when it came at the cost of her dignity. He reached for my hand. She brought everything you pretended to be but never were. We walked out of that house, out of Vivienne's perfectly appointed world, into the Connecticut darkness. Behind us, I heard it. Faint but unmistakable. The sound of Vivienne Ashworth screaming. Vivienne signed the confession 3 days later. Harrison Mitchell presented it to us in his office, 18 pages detailing every transaction, every hidden account, every dollar she'd diverted from the Ashworth Trust over 15 years. Her signature at the bottom, shaky, defeated, but legally binding. She's agreed to full restitution, Harrison said, plus interest. The total comes to $22.3 million. She'll liquidate personal assets to cover it. Real estate, investments, jewelry, everything she acquired during her marriage to Charles. What about criminal charges? Julian asked. That's your decision. We have enough evidence to prosecute, but it would be public. Messy. The Ashworth name would be in every newspaper for months. Julian looked at me. What do you think? 6 months ago, he wouldn't have asked. He would have decided and expected me to accept it. But 6 months ago was a different marriage, a different us. I think, I said carefully, that Vivienne's real punishment isn't prison. It's losing control. She spent 24 years building power, and now she has none. That's justice enough. Harrison nodded. There's one more thing. The investigation into Charles's death. We both went still. The medical examiner reviewed the original autopsy findings. Charles's medication levels were inconsistent with his prescriptions. Someone was tampering with them. But Harrison paused. The pills came from a pharmacy Vivienne never had access to. Charles picked them up himself. The only other person who handled them was his private nurse, a woman named Elena Rodriguez. Who's that? I asked. Charles hired her 6 months before he died. Personal care, medication management. Vivienne recommended her. Elena had impeccable references. But when investigators tried to locate her after Charles died, she'd disappeared. No forwarding address, no employment history after the Ashworths. It's as if she never existed. Julian's face went grey. Mum hired someone to... We can't prove it. Elena's gone. The evidence is circumstantial. But Charles believed Vivienne was capable of it. That's why he protected you, Mrs. Ashworth. He knew if something happened to him, Vivienne would come after anyone who threatened her control. The room fell silent. The weight of what we couldn't prove, but deeply suspected, hanging between us. So she gets away with murder, Julian said flatly. She loses everything else, Harrison replied. Sometimes that's all justice looks like. We moved out of the Tribeca penthouse 2 weeks later. Not because we had to. Technically, it was Julian's. But neither of us could live in that space anymore. Too many memories of performance. Too much Vivienne in every design choice. We bought a brownstone in Brooklyn. Park Slope, smaller, older, nothing like the sterile perfection of Ashworth real estate. It needed work. The floors creaked. The kitchen was from 1987. The bathroom tiles were seafoam green. I loved it immediately. Julian took longer to adjust. He'd never lived anywhere that wasn't pristine. Never had to think about renovation budgets, or whether the refrigerator was worth repairing. Never experienced the particular satisfaction of building something himself. But he learned. Slowly. We learned together. One Saturday morning, 3 months after everything imploded, I found him in the kitchen, attempting to make breakfast. Eggs were burning, toast was smoking, coffee was overflowing. "Help," he said when he saw me. Not joking, actually asking. I laughed, turned off the stove, salvaged what I could. "You know we can afford to eat out," he said, "or hire a chef." "We can, but we won't." I handed him a spatula, because this is part of it. Learning to take care of ourselves, each other, building a life that's ours, not your mother's, not your family's, ours. He took the spatula, looked at it like it was a foreign object, then looked at me. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "Be a normal person, make breakfast, live in a house that needs repairs, be married to someone who challenges me instead of accommodating me." "Good," I said. "Neither do I. We'll figure it out together." "What if I'm terrible at it?" "Then you'll be terrible at it. And I'll love you anyway, as long as you keep trying." He kissed me. Soft, real. The kind of kiss that didn't perform anything except genuine affection. We burned the toast. The eggs were rubbery. The coffee was too strong. It was the best breakfast I'd had in months. Vivienne sent a letter 4 months after the confrontation. It arrived at our new address. Hand-delivered. No return address. Julian stared at it for 3 days before opening it. I sat beside him when he finally did. Both of us on our second-hand couch. In our imperfect house, in our honest life. Julian, I won't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I won't claim I did everything for you. That would be another lie. I did it for myself. Because I was terrified. Because poverty carved something out of me that I couldn't repair. Because security became my religion and control became my prayer. Your father saw it. He tried to save me from myself. I wasn't ready to be saved. I did love you. That part was real. But I loved my fear more. And fear makes monsters of us all. Tiara was right. I saw her as a threat because she reminded me of who I used to be before desperation turned into obsession. She had what I'd lost. The ability to be vulnerable, to choose love over security, to build instead of control. I didn't kill your father. But I might as well have. My actions, my choices, my relentless need for power, they killed something in him long before his heart stopped. And for that, I am truly sorry. I'm leaving the country, starting over somewhere I'm not. Vivienne Ashworth. Just Vivienne. A woman who's lost everything and has to learn, finally, how to be enough without external validation. I hope you find happiness. Real happiness. The kind I never let myself have. With regret and a love I never learned how to show properly, Vivienne Julian read it twice, then folded it carefully, set it aside. Do you believe her? I asked. I don't know, maybe. Does it matter? It matters if it gives you peace. He thought about that. I think peace isn't about believing her. It's about accepting that I may never know the whole truth, and choosing to move forward anyway. That's very mature of you. Therapy helps. He smiled. Sad but real. Turns out 43 years of family dysfunction doesn't resolve itself overnight. Who knew? We'd been in therapy, individual and couples, working through the wreckage of our first 18 months, learning to communicate without performing, to share power instead of hoarding or surrendering it, to build partnership instead of falling into the roles we'd been trained for. It was hard, uncomfortable, sometimes painful. But it was real. And real was what we'd both been missing. 6 months after the confrontation, I got a job offer. Editor-in-chief at a digital lifestyle platform, overseeing content, managing a team, building something meaningful. The salary was good, but not exceptional. The hours would be demanding. The work would challenge me. I wanted it desperately. Take it, Julian said when I told him. Obviously, take it. It means less time at home, more travel. I won't be able to be the perfect housewife my mother wanted. Good. I don't want that. I want you. Ambitious, driven, challenging, imperfect you. What about when we have kids? The question I'd been avoiding. If we have kids. I don't know if I want. Then we don't have kids. Or we have one kid. Or we adopt. Or we wait 10 years and decide then. Julian pulled me close. Tiara, I spent my whole life following someone else's script. I'm not doing that anymore. And I'm definitely not imposing it on you. We build our life together. No expectations, except honesty. I took the job, started the following month, threw myself into work with the passion I'd suppressed for 18 months, built a team, created content that mattered. Used my platform to tell stories about women reclaiming power in systems designed to diminish them. It felt like breathing again. Julian adjusted his own work, cut back hours at the family firm, started focusing on investments that aligned with our values instead of just maximizing returns. He was happier, lighter, more himself. We were figuring it out. Not perfectly, but honestly. 1 year after the confrontation, Harrison Mitchell called. "I thought you should know," he said. "The trust investigation is complete. Vivienne's restitution has been processed, and there's been a distribution." "Distribution?" I asked. Charles's amendment included a provision. Any spouse who successfully challenges family corruption receives a one-time distribution from the trust, as compensation for the personal cost of exposing the truth. "It's substantial." He told me the number. I sat down. "That's... Harrison, I can't accept that. I didn't do this for money." "I know. That's exactly why Charles structured it this way. He wanted to reward integrity, courage, the willingness to do what's right, even when it costs you everything." Harrison paused. "Mrs. Ashworth, you exposed systemic corruption. You protected the Ashworth legacy by revealing the truth. This isn't a payoff, it's recognition. Use it however you want." I told Julian that night. Showed him the distribution notice. "What do you want to do with it?" he asked. I thought about that younger version of myself, standing in front of Section 8 housing, wearing a too big coat, dreaming of a life beyond poverty. I thought about all the girls still standing in front of buildings like that. Brilliant, hungry, terrified they'd never escape. "I want to start a foundation," I said. "Scholarships for girls from low-income backgrounds, not just for tuition, for everything. Housing, food, professional wardrobe, networking opportunities. Everything I didn't have. Everything that would have made my journey less impossible." "That's perfect," Julian said. "What will you call it?" I thought about Charles, about his final gift, about the choice he'd given me between freedom and destruction, about how sometimes they're the same thing. "The Catherine Ashworth Foundation," I said. "After your biological mother, the woman who chose herself, when everyone wanted her to disappear." Julian's eyes filled with tears. "She'd like that. So would your father." We launched the foundation 6 months later, funded it with my distribution and Julian's matching contribution, hired staff who understood poverty wasn't a moral failure, but a systemic trap, created programs that recognized talent without requiring perfect performance. In our first year, we funded 40 scholarships, 40 girls who wouldn't have to choose between dignity and opportunity, who could pursue education without shame. It felt like justice, real justice, the kind that builds instead of destroys. I'm writing this 2 years after Vivienne slid that post-nuptial agreement across a table and told me I was worth nothing. 2 years after I discovered I was worth everything. Not because of the money. Money was never the point. Power was the point. Agency was the point. The fundamental human right to exist as yourself, without performing for someone else's approval. Here's what I learned. Systems of control persist, because they're invisible to the people they serve. Julian couldn't see the inequality in our marriage, because he'd been raised to see it as natural. Vivienne couldn't imagine losing power, because she'd built her entire identity on having it. Charles couldn't escape his own complicity, even as he tried to protect me from it. But invisibility isn't inevitability. When you name the pattern, when you refuse to perform, when you demand equity instead of accepting accommodation, you disrupt the system, not through anger, though anger has its place, but through strategic clarity, through the revolutionary act of saying, "This doesn't serve me anymore." The safe Vivienne thought was empty. It held everything: truth, justice, power, not the power to control others, but the power to control your own story. When I opened it, when I revealed what Charles had left me, Vivienne screamed. Not from surprise, from recognition. She'd spent 24 years running from the poor girl she used to be. And in that moment, she saw her own reflection staring back, from across a table. Except I'd learned what she never did. Poverty doesn't define you. Fear defines you. And the antidote to fear isn't money. It's courage. Julian and I are still married, still learning, still fumbling our way through partnership without scripts. Some days are easy. Some days I want to throw dishes. Some days he forgets that emotional labor counts. Some days I overreact because old wounds heal slowly. But we're equals. Messy, imperfect, negotiated equals. Vivienne's somewhere in Europe. Last I heard, she was working as a financial consultant, using her real name, paying her own rent, living with the consequences of her choices. I hope she finds peace. I really do. Not because I've forgiven her. Forgiveness is complicated, and I'm still working on it. But because her suffering doesn't undo mine. And liberation isn't about revenge. It's about building something better from the wreckage. The Catherine Ashworth Foundation just funded its 100th scholarship. 100 girls who won't have to choose between dignity and opportunity. 100 futures that could have been stolen by systemic poverty, but weren't. That's my legacy. Not the money, not the Ashworth name. The knowledge that I used my leverage to create leverage for others. That I took power that was meant to silence me and turned it into amplification for voices that desperately needed to be heard. My name is Tiara. I'm not an Ashworth by blood. I'm an Ashworth by choice. The choice to stay, the choice to fight, the choice to build something better than what I inherited. I learned the price of secrets on a Tuesday afternoon. But I learned the value of truth over 2 years of hard work, honest conversations, and the slow rebuilding of trust. And here's what I want you to understand. If you're performing a role that diminishes you, if you're living in a system that only works when you disappear, if you're told your worth is conditional on your obedience, you have more power than you know. Document the inequality, name the pattern, demand equity, not accommodation. And when they tell you you'll leave with nothing, open the safe. Show them what they missed. You might be surprised what you've been carrying all along. What do you think about this story? Have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought they held all the power? Have you ever discovered your own strength by refusing to accept someone else's definition of your worth? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this story resonated with you, please like and share it with someone who needs the reminder that their value isn't determined by what others think they're worth. And subscribe for more stories about challenging power structures, reclaiming agency, and building equity in relationships where control masqueraded as love. Remember, you are not required to accept powerlessness as the price of belonging. Your voice matters. Your boundaries matter. Your choice to expose truth instead of enabling lies matters. The safe was never empty. They just convinced you not to look inside. Thank you for listening. Until next time, keep opening safes. Keep demanding truth. Keep choosing courage over comfort. Because your liberation might just liberate someone else.